Welcome back for another season of the College Football Roundup right here on Sobros Network. It's your favorite degenerate gamblers back for another run at this thing. Mine's right, ass is tight as we kick off the 2024 campaign here with a little bit of a preview show. It's been a big offseason in the world of college football. There's a lot of big things to talk about before we even start getting into the conference previews and all that. We got a little bit of time. We're a couple of weeks away from week 0 at this point. So now's the perfect time to get this show on the road. Of course, we are powered by Memo's Mexican Kitchen today out in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. For my money, it's my favorite Mexican food in the Nashville area. Head on out there at some point. Let them know Sobros Network sent you. Try a margarita. Try some of that quesadilla. Get some grilled jalapenos to start. The menu is fantastic. You can take a look at it at memosmexicankitchen.com. Follow them on Instagram at memoskitchen as well. I am Stoney Keeley, the EIC at SobrosNetwork.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Stoney Keeley. Collectively, we are at Sobros Network on all major social media platforms. And he's back. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. McCash. McCash, how you doing today, my man?
Fantastically. I think that's a word. It's going to be a word
not,
for today.
It is now.
Here's the problem I have. One, it's hot as hell again.
It is.
And here in Memtown, the 901, we've been like low 80s for like the last week. So I was getting a little I was feeling a little good about myself. I was like, it's getting close to football season. It's getting close to spooky season. Because to me, once July 5th happens, it's officially spooky season, but that's for a whole other podcast.
I'm kind of with you.
My thing is, and maybe it's just me, has this felt like the longest off season from the Super Bowl to today ever for you? Because it feels that way to me.
Well, from a college perspective, yeah. I mean, the NFL draft kept me pretty busy, and then the next thing you know, rookie mini camps are starting up in the NFL, and we're off to the races there. But like when you approach me about this show, like, hey, it's about time to fire up the College Football Roundup again, I kind of thought to myself, oh shit, like it feels like it's been forever since we watched Michigan and Washington in the national championship game, and now after a tumultuous offseason, we're here. But I'm with you about like once July 5th hits, to me, like I don't have much left to look forward to in summer. That's when I start getting antsy and I'm kind of like, all right, we can hurry it up and get the football season here. So it has felt like a long off season. I think part of that is because there have been so many changes that we're going to talk about today. Conference realignment, coaching changes. It's not just that coaches change. They change every offseason, but you had maybe, I would say, the greatest football coach in the history of college football stepping away from the sport. And then you had Jim Harbaugh, who the reigning national champion, Michigan Wolverines, he walks away from that program to go back to the NFL as the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. I mean, you're talking about two pillars of the industry walking away. And then we've also got expanded playoffs. There's going to be 12 playoff teams this year, works a little bit differently. I think the anticipation to just see how this thing is all going to play out has just been eating at people to the point where we can't wait any longer. It's got to get here. And I think that's what's added to part of this feeling of anticipation as well.
I completely agree. What's held me down the last couple of weeks is the long return in the making of college football on gaming systems.
Yeah, have you been playing?
Oh God, I'm about to finish up my first year in my dynasty. I'm happy to announce that at this current moment, the University of Memphis is 14-0. We are in the semifinals, coming off a 105-0 whooping of Oklahoma State.
There you go.
I forget who I'm taking on next. I think Notre Dame. No, Nebraska. Somehow Nebraska was the 11th seed in the playoffs. Memphis the 12th seed. So we know that matchup is not going to happen in real life, but it's nice to dream.
I saw that. So if I'm not mistaken, Nebraska, Pitt, and Syracuse were all playoff teams in your game. Yeah,
it's wild.
So how did that happen for Syracuse? I'm very curious.
I honestly was too focused on getting my Tigers to the finish line. I haven't been able to deep dive how everybody got there.
It's as a good coach does.
Yeah, Syracuse was the 7th seed. They lost in the first round to Oregon. Pittsburgh was a 2 seed. I mean, my this is what's odd. My Final Four matchups, you have Nebraska versus Oregon. That's an 11 versus 10. So we've had a lot of upsets along the way. Memphis, the Cinderella at 12, is taking on the number 1 seed Michigan Wolverines in the other half of the semifinals.
There you go. There you go. You got to be feeling good about your Tigers in real life this season, though. I know there's a lot of people that are kind of projecting Boise State to be that group of 5 team this year, and Liberty and App State I've seen getting some love, but I think people are sleeping on the job that the Memphis Tigers have done recruiting this season. I think they're going to field a pretty good squad. What are the vibes like in Memphis for this team this year?
Memphis, for me personally, as a Tigers fan, as a born and raised and actually an alum as well, I've loved my Tigers, but Memphis has always been a basketball town. It always
Yeah.
has been, it always will be. But let's be honest, over the last 15 years, this football program has outshined the basketball program by leaps and bounds.
This
And
feels crazy to say.
it does. It does. But I am on this bandwagon for this year. It's all or nothing to me. This team is ready to pounce. Coach Silverfield and his crew have done a phenomenal job in the transfer portal. What they have coming in past this year with some of the highly ranked recruits from Georgia coming in. But it all boils down to the Smith family over at FedEx, at Federal Express, donating $5 million a year for the next 5 years towards the NIL program. That money is the vast majority of that money is going straight to football only. There's some of the smaller sports are getting a cut of it. A little bit is going to basketball, but basketball has its own monster of an NIL deal that goes on because
Mhm.
it feeds itself. But that deal is a lot of the reasons why a lot of the studs from last year's team that won the Liberty Bowl against Iowa State came back. Seth Hennigan, our 4-year starting quarterback, which I think gives us a leg against those other teams like Boise State because we have an experience. We're one of the few teams in the country at any level that has an experienced 4-year starter quarterback coming back this year.
Man, I tell you what, he's getting some buzz in NFL draft circles as well. I mean, he's a guy that we could be talking about as a riser this season that might see himself land with an NFL team next spring.
If he stays healthy and this season goes the way a lot of people are projecting it to, he will absolutely earn that opportunity.
How confident are you? I mean, can they be the non-power 5, which I guess is just the non-power 4 at this point, representative in the playoff?
Absolutely, because this year there's no SMU around. Houston's gone as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
some teams have left to go to the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, what have you. So that takes away a lot of the competition. Boise State has a new head coach, which we'll probably get into when we talk about some of the new faces around the nation. Tulane lost their coach as well. That's another one
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
UTSA, it could be a spoiler in the AAC. Who knows? Liberty, they have a new coach as well, but they're not in a rebuilding mode. They're just trying to just keep on pressing. The thing is, no offense to Conference USA, they don't play anybody,
No,
and I
it's
think that hurts them more than anything.
I think Conference USA has been hit the hardest by all this realignment
Uh,
because, well, I mean, from a mid-major, so to speak,
eh,
perspective, like they've been gutted, and
yeah,
that's where my beloved Blue Raiders play, and it's just awfully hard to really get some traction in that conference. Is they're just constantly rebuilding, and they're by and large just plucking FCS teams that are coming up a level, and it's hard to build a resume when that's all
yeah.
you're doing. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. I like Memphis. I think Boise State seems to be the sexy pick right now, but for people that have been paying attention to what's been going on in that Memphis program, it it sure feels like it could be a big special year for the Memphis Tigers.
I think this could surpass what we did at the Cotton Bowl,
At
6
the
years
Penn
ago.
State.
Yeah, against Penn State, which was a
Yeah.
very competitive game, despite what the score showed at the end. You got Seth Hennigan, Rock Taylor, stud wide receiver is back. We got Mario Anderson the leading running back from South Carolina last year, is going to be taking the rock.
Yeah.
Our schedule, we do play Florida State at Florida State, which I will be at in Tallahassee. I'm really excited about that. That's our toughest matchup, obviously, on paper. That's a top 10 team we'll be taking on fairly early in the season. But our toughest games in conference, unfortunately, against Tulane and I think UTSA as well, are all on the road. So we
Ooh,
have to get the job done on the road to earn that spot in the playoffs this year.
man, we're kicking off the 2024 season with some Memphis Tigers talk. It's the natural starting point for every college football podcast.
And
The
with that
Memphis
said,
Tigers.
next week there will be new episodes of the Eye on the Tigers podcast. So if you want to hear a lot
And there we
more about
go.
the University of Memphis football program, tune into these SoBro networks to find out how you can listen.
There you go. Well, if you're watching with us live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, jump into the comments. Let us know who your team is, what you're thinking, how you feel about all the changes this offseason, whatever you have on your mind. We'll get to the comments as we can. But before we get started on our premiere episode into the meat of what we wanted to talk about today, I want to pour one out for Pac-12 After Dark because the Pac-12 just absolutely ravaged, down to two teams, Oregon State and Washington State. Now there are reports coming out that the Mountain West doesn't even really want either of them. The Mountain West feels like they're going to be just fine on their own. And man, these are two programs that have been pretty good, pretty fun watches recently. And now they're kind of left with nowhere to go. The musical chairs game has left them with nowhere to sit. And I don't know, man. I'm going to miss seeing those zany Pac-12 rivalry games late at night. You look at the Mountain West, and from a time zone perspective, it kind of figures like that might be the conference to take that over. We're going to get some late night, like Washington and Rutgers games out on the West Coast, but I just don't think it's the same energy. Do you think the Mountain West can take up the mantle as the fun midnight football on Saturday nights after you're recovering from having been drinking all day?
I mean, the opportunity will be there because they're the last man standing, basically, when it comes to West Coast conferences. I just don't think they have the sexy matchups
Yeah.
like the Pac-12 did, even when it was the Pac-10 as well. I personally, as an American Conference fan, Oregon and Washington, last time I checked, are both in America. Come on over, baby. Come on over. Texas isn't that far to get to. You know, we still have, some Texas teams in the conference, and then you just hop on over to Memphis, Let's make it a true American conference.
Who did the American ad this year? Did they add Army and Charlotte? Are they new?
Charlotte's not new. Army's the only new team this year.
Army's the only new team this
but
year.
But they're football only.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a stacked conference. There's a lot of teams. What is that? I'm 14 teams in the American Conference now.
I believe so. That's what it is now. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, man. My Blue Raiders are stuck down in Conference USA with FIU, Louisiana Tech, and UTEP and Western Kentucky are the only like legacy programs.
Don't forget you added Kennesaw State this year, man.
Added Kennesaw State. We still got Jacksonville State, Liberty, New Mexico State, Sam Houston. Tough scene. What's up, Jake? Our buddy Jake's in the comments saying,
hey,
I'm going to highlight the show there. We talking ball today. Yeah, we're trying to. We're starting the college football season by talking about the Memphis Tigers and the Mountain West Conference.
As one should.
Yeah, we're off to a great start. Can you tell that we
hear about Georgia and Alabama on any podcast?
That's right, man. I'm sure, it probably shows, but we are a little bit sickos when it comes to this sport, and our degenerate gambling habits probably contribute to that. Ugh. But you gotta pay attention. Conference realignment. Let's start from there. I want to get like big picture wise before we get into who's moved where. What are your general impressions about the conference realignment? A lot of shakeups. I mean, we're talking about let me do my math real quick. 13 teams from the big four conferences that are shuffling around here. It's kind of sad to me to see some of the like geographic regional rivalries die out a little bit. Kind of weird to see like the Apple Cups taking place in September this year between Washington and Washington State, when that was usually a pretty intense rivalry that had some pretty high stakes at the end of the season the last couple of years. I am kind of kind of bummed about that, and I understand people that gripe about the professionalization, if we're making up words today while we're at it, professionalization of college football, how it kind of takes some of the pomp and circumstance, the pageantry, the tradition away from the sport. How do you feel about it, big picture wise, as we kind of move towards these four super conferences?
I'm very torn because I'm excited about some of these new matchups that we either
Sure.
haven't seen ever or haven't seen in like 20, 30 years. When was the last time like UCLA and Penn State played a regular season football game, if it's ever happened?
Yeah.
Who knows? But that can happen. It's going to happen, I should say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm kind of a traditionalist where I love like the old Pac-10. I know for years it was the Pac-10, became the Pac-12 when
Hmm.
realignment slowly started taking off. I never thought it was going to blossom into what it's grown into. And I kind of wish we could go. I wish money didn't run everything in college sports now because let's be
Yeah.
honest, there's no amateurism in college football or basketball anymore. Now that the NIL is such a major factor in it, you're basically paying for players. I mean, not basically, you flat out are.
Yeah.
Um,
That's happening.
so I kind of for this year, I need to take all my stuff on my wall down and get like a chalkboard or a dry erase board and draw a map of all the different realignments going on so I can keep up on a daily basis on like who is where now.
Yeah.
Because this year specifically, there was so much going on. And then there was the ones like in the SEC that had been in plan for years now that's finally going into fruition with Oklahoma and Texas that like I'm like, I don't know who plays who anymore. Who am I kidding? It's too much.
All I know is that at one point this season, I think in October sometime, we're going to get a rematch in the regular season of the national championship game between Michigan and Washington. And I think that's going to be pretty cool. And like, listen, I like that we are probably going to see the big programs playing each other more often. It's going to mean bigger games throughout the regular season. But there is just that part of me, and maybe it's just me being a traditionalist that's just kind of like, man, I feel like you're sucking a little bit of what was special out of college football.
Yep.
And that's where I'm concerned is this beast continues to be fed. You mentioned the SEC. Let's start there. Texas and Oklahoma joining the conference. Do you think it'll be a rude awakening for these two as they transition to quote WCW from 1990s, where the big boys play?
Where the big boys play, yeah. Uh, I don't if you'd asked me this like 2 years ago when both teams were kind of in a down state,
Yeah.
I would say yes. But last year both teams had a pretty good year, I thought.
Hmm.
Uh, my concern is this, and I think this is going to happen in other conferences as well that have added new power teams. I think you're going to start seeing some of those, you know, teams start to instead of having that 10-11 season that they're used to every year in certain conferences, now struggling to get that 8-9 win because they're playing much more tougher competition. Like, not everybody's going to get to play Vanderbilt this year. So instead of playing
Yeah.
Vanderbilt, you might play at Texas or Oklahoma, and that's a
Yeah.
much tougher game.
Do you think any of that is negated by the fact that there are now 12 playoff spots on the line? Do you feel like that maybe gives teams a little bit of cushion that they might not have otherwise had to get
I,
those 10-win seasons?
yes, yes, but my concern is, and this is not to be an SEC basher, because what you hear on TV and the radio all around is like when they start, projecting what's going to happen come, December, is like, oh, the SEC is going to be between 4 and 5 teams. I just, without looking at schedules deeply, I just have a hard time believing there's going to be 5 teams with a quality enough record from the SEC to make that 12-team playoff. Well,
Okay.
actually, let's look at it. Let's look at it and be honest. It's 11 really because one of them's guaranteed to the group of 5.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it's really 11. I mean, you're telling me 5 out of 11 spots are going to come from the SEC? I have
Yeah.
a hard time believing that.
I'm
Four is
kind of with you
pushing it to
there.
me.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. Let's get Jake's comment here. He's a big Sooners fan. OU might not win a ship this season, but they are about to stomp a mud hole in the Vols to open up the conference schedule. Jake, I need
Um,
your take on Brent Venables. Like, what do you think about him as a head coach, the future of that Sooners program? Because I have some questions about him, but Oklahoma, I think, could be a pretty sneaky fun watch this season. I mean, there's an uptick in competition, but what chance do you have, or what chance do you give them of, like Jake predicted here, beating this Tennessee team this year?
oh, look, I'm going to vote for everybody and root for everybody to beat Tennessee. So I'm with Jake there. Look, I think it's very possible. Tennessee and Ole Miss are kind of those two sexy picks people are talking about for the
Yeah,
playoffs, and I'm just not as high on Tennessee this year because maybe it's just me. I have to see it with this new lineup of teams. I got to look at Tennessee's schedule as well, but I don't see Tennessee as one of those 4 to 5 teams that are going to legitimately be in the running for a playoff spot from the SEC.
yeah, I think it's a lot's going to depend on whether or not Nico takes the next step as quarterback. I think you've got to hit some easy throws to execute that Vols offense, and just didn't really see it consistently in the bowl game against Iowa, but the talent is there. And I think, if he goes on a run, maybe they could go on a run, but I kind of like Ole Miss as the sexy dark horse team in the SEC this year. And now we're just completely off track because we're not
I
even
know.
talking about conference
I'm
realignment
I'm
anymore.
pulling up schedules, so yeah, we're completely up.
Yeah, let's move on to the Big Ten then. So Oregon, USC, Washington, and UCLA, all from the West Coast, joining the Big Ten. How big of an adjustment do you think it's going to be for these teams that are used to, I don't want to say milder weather because, it gets pretty cold in Washington and Oregon, but they're not going to be playing a whole lot of games in California when
No.
they're traveling out to the Midwest. Do you think this puts them at an inherent disadvantage when joining the Big Ten conference, going up against the Ohio States and the Michigans and the Penn States of the world?
Absolutely, it does. And I don't think a lot of people have taken that in consideration, like how much weather come November, December, even parts of October, depending on where you're playing, are going to play a factor in that. Yes,
Yeah,
Oregon, yeah, it gets cold, but it gets more wet than it does cold. Washington definitely gets cold, but it's not that Ohio State, Michigan, those Great Lakes
bitter.
area teams where it's bitter cold, and
Yeah.
same with Penn State as well. I think that's going to be a big, you know, change of pace for these new schools coming in. But one thing I want these conferences to do, especially the ones that have numbers in their names, change your damn names.
I'm with you, man.
You're the Big
This
18.
It's the Big 18 right now. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm interested. I think this is, as far as the realignment goes, I think this is, to me, adding these four teams to the Big Ten is more interesting than adding Texas and Oklahoma to the
Oh yeah,
SEC, because I am fascinated by what Oregon can do in, like, can the Ducks go in and win this conference year one in it? And how does the geographical difference play into it? You talked about that UCLA Penn State game. It's probably going to help some of these Big Ten teams that have to travel out to California in
yeah.
November with the weather there. So I think there are a lot of different factors. But any of these four teams that you think can go on a run and beat Ohio State to win the Big Ten their first year in the conference?
First year, I don't see anybody. If anybody, I would go Oregon.
Yeah, me too.
But
I
but
like
what?
Oregon.
But think of this though. Think of a team like, let's say USC, for example, the team that has, or not USC, but a UCLA, a team that historically has run the ball well. Imagine them going to Iowa. With that staunch
Yeah.
defense they have, the style of play that some of these Pac-12 teams play coming into the Big Ten or Big 18 uh, are going to be clashing, and I'm excited to see how some of these Pac-12 teams coming in are going to be forced to kind of change the way they play on offense in the conference, or is their offense going to be good enough to make these defenses from the old school conference teams be able to switch?
Washington has a new head coach. They have to replace 3 wide receivers, their quarterback, their running back, 2 of their starting offensive line. I think if there wasn't so much turnover there in that Huskies program, I'd probably give them a better shot, but I'm with you. I think it's Oregon. I think Oregon's the team out of these 4. I like the way they're built. I think Dan Lanning is probably one of the probably top 3 or 4 head coaches in college football right now.
Fair.
They get Dylan Gabriel, transfer from Oklahoma. I think this is going to be a pretty good Duck squad. The Big 12 probably didn't get the flashy names that the SEC and the Big 18 got. I think Utah is a pretty damn good football program to add to your conference. Yep. Arizona State, and Colorado. A lot of buzz about Colorado around that program for whether warranted or not. But
not for being good.
Yeah, but these 4 teams are going to join the fray in the Big 12. Same question as the Big 18. Which one do you see faring the best right off the bat?
It's got to be Utah to me.
I think they're favored to win the Big 12 right now, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm looking at who's left in the Big 12 after Texas and Oklahoma left, and I'm like,
yeah,
who's going to win this?
I know I've got a bet. I got some pretty good odds on Kansas winning the Big 12 this year. I think Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and Utah are considered among the favorites there. Arizona is a fun little upstart program. They've got a good quarterback. They've got a wide receiver that's probably going to be a first-round draft pick next year, but they lose Jed Fish, who felt like the secret sauce for a lot of their success last year. So I'm kind of wondering how they're handling the transition. We might start seeing some signs of life for Arizona State, as that program has been under a bit of a rebuild for the last couple of years. And then Colorado, I just don't know, man. I tell you what, like, I've started my prep for the 2025 draft, and I've watched 3 games of Shedeur Sanders. The UCLA game last year was probably the worst offensive line performance that I have ever seen in college football. That unit is so bad that it makes it damn near impossible to evaluate Shedeur Sanders as a draft prospect. So if they don't make upgrades there, if they don't improve along the offensive line, I can't imagine Colorado is going to make much progress in 2024. Like, by default, that leaves us with Utah, with Kyle Whittingham, solid program, pedigree. Cam Rising's coming back for what feels like his 15th year at Utah. They've got the veteran experience. I don't really take issue with Utah being the favorites in the Big 12, even not just among these 4 teams, but among the whole conference. What do you think their chances are of winning it?
I think it's very high. I like the Iowa State team that's coming back from last year.
Yeah.
They had a good showing in the Liberty Bowl last year against Memphis. Luckily, they took that L. But it's funny you talk about betting on Kansas. We just sat here like 2 years ago talking about how at halftime of a game, they went on social media begging people to come to the game for free. And here we are talking about them winning a conference championship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, good program there. They've got to replace the great Jason Bean, who I don't think has stuck to an NFL roster. If I'm not mistaken, was he drafted by the Memphis UFL team? I can't recall, but
I'm not up to date on my UFL drafts, unfortunately.
Yeah. I like Kansas as a dark horse in that conference, but I think the odds are pretty good that Utah's going to take the Big 12. Jake chimes in, could Colorado versus Arizona break scoring records in a single game? What was that? Who was that that random bowl game between like Washington and Baylor or something like that they scored? Yeah. They scored like 70 something points each. I could see Colorado and Arizona. I could see them lighten up the scoreboard. We might have to circle that one this year for the Sickos Watch of the Week or something.
Take the over.
The ACC getting the leftovers. I mean, let's be real here. If you're an ACC fan, I can't imagine you're doing cartwheels because your additions this offseason are Stanford, Cal, and SMU. The ACC kind of feels like they're teetering on a line right now. Not so different from where the Pac-12 was. I thought that the Big 12 would be the conference that would dissolve. Geographically, I thought it made sense for like half the conference to join the Big Ten and half the conference to join the Pac-12, but they're still standing. The Pac-12 is gone. The ACC feels like that conference that's left, that once everybody at the dance finds a partner, you're turning around and looking at the ACC last. And I don't know, man. There are some rumors out there that Clemson and Florida State are trying to get out. They're trying to find homes, maybe even Miami. What's your feeling on the pulse of the ACC right now?
Well, this is where Memphis should have gone in realignment.
Yeah,
Talks
I
here
like
were
that.
all about the Big 12, but I thought we were a better fit for the ACC. Not only would that be a superpower for college basketball, with Duke, Florida State, Clemson, Carolina, add Memphis to that list, and some of the other teams that have long histories of success in basketball, I thought it'd been phenomenal. But I thought it fit in football as well. But we didn't do what SMU did. SMU bought their way into the ACC.
Yeah,
Like, hey, take our TV money for X amount of years. We just want to be at the dance.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, good for them. It worked. To me, Stanford joining made no sense at all. You've already got Duke. What other academic school do you need? Um,
Might
and
as well
then
call
Cal,
Northwestern while you're at it.
yeah, go ahead, get Vandy. Vandy will come all over.
Yeah,
Uh, but why not take the Ivy League and just make it the super smart guys league and
there
add
we
add
go.
Stanford to it? And
Yeah.
then I don't know what Cal doesn't bring anything to the table. I think in any sport, so I guess they had to go somewhere.
Any of these three teams have a puncher's chance at a dark horse ACC run?
Out of anybody, SMU.
Yeah.
But I don't see SMU or any of these three teams seriously contending for the ACC championship. I still think it's a Miami, Clemson, and Florida States to have.
Let's talk about some of the new faces and new places here, the coaching changes that we talked about earlier. Nick Saban steps down as the head coach of Alabama after what feels like an eternity of massive success, great success, more success than anybody. It was a sad day in our household as Alabama fans when
My
we got the
condolences.
news. But then they go and hire Kalen DeBoer, and it kind of feels like you're a little early on Kalen DeBoer at this point. I think you probably I would have thought he would have needed a couple of more sustained seasons at Washington, sustained success at Washington before he got an SEC job. But hey, you got to strike while the iron's hot. This is a guy that has won everywhere that he's been, and now he takes over for one of the more prestigious college football programs in the nation. What do you think of the hire of Kalen DeBoer? How do you like that for the Crimson Tide?
I personally love it. I hear you when you say it's an maybe too early hire for a role this big at a school like Alabama. But my
Mm-hmm.
thing is, the dude has won everywhere, and not just one. He's won at a high level everywhere.
Yeah.
25-3 in 2 years at Washington, including a Pac-12 title and competing for a national championship last year. And then what he did at Sioux Falls, winning 3 NAIA national championships. The dude went 67-3 over 5
Crazy.
seasons. That's dude just knows how to win.
Yeah.
And that's what Alabama expects. Look, I know it's going to be a transition period because this is like you said, where the big boys play. But I think they've got the right hire if they're just patient with him.
I think it's kind of crazy that Jalen Milroe stuck around at Alabama. And I, as an Alabama fan, am super stoked to see what Kalen DeBoer can do with Jalen Milroe this year after seeing what he did with Michael Penix Jr. last year. What do you think DeBoer's addition means for the Tide quarterback?
I think it means a lot. I don't want to say stability because Kalen's new there, but I think with the success that he had with the quarterbacks at Washington, I think gave him a reason to want to stick around.
Yeah, I'm with you. Michigan, the reigning national champions. We mentioned it earlier. Jim Harbaugh is off to the NFL. They promote Sharon Moore to take over the program. a program that, man, you want to talk about depleted to the NFL draft. The Michigan Wolverines are going to look like a completely different team. The AP preseason poll reflects that. They're currently, despite being the reigning champs, ranked 9th in the preseason poll. How big of shoes does Sharon Moore have to fill at this Michigan job, and what's your confidence level like in him if you're a Michigan fan?
Uh, his shoes are big to fill. Let's not say that Harbaugh walked off to the NFL. That boy ran to the NFL
Yeah,
because he knew some things were coming down on him,
he
and
did.
they're still going to come down on him. They're just not going to mean anything.
Fair enough. Yeah,
But I think Sharon is just a placeholder right now.
yeah.
I think there's going to be a couple of years where they're not like 5-6 win teams. They're still bowl games. They're still competing for the conference championship, but they're not Michigan as we've seen the last 4 or 5 years under Harbaugh. I think there's going to be some rebuilding of this program, and they're a coach or two away from that.
Should be a big year for Donovan Edwards, who also made the Madden cover, or not Madden, the NCAA football game cover as well. It's kind of drove some people nuts. Like, how did this guy get up there? But you know what? Hey, good for him. He should be a player in the NFL draft as well next year. Let's go to Texas A&M hires Mike Elko. I know we were big Mike Elko fans on this show last season, the way he turned that Duke program around. Not a place that, historically has had a whole lot of success in football. But, man, that defense looked like a really good, well-coached, disciplined unit. They sent a few guys to the NFL this year as well, and I feel like Mike Elko coming to Texas A&M is going to be a stabilizing presence. I don't know that he'll get the job done right away in 2024, but I kind of felt like this was one of the home run hires of this cycle. What do you think about Mike Elko's prospects at Texas A&M?
I agree with you. I think it's the right hire. Again, it'll take some time as well, but he's got familiarity there, being the defensive coordinator there for 4 years
Yep.
before leaving to go to Duke. He's only at Duke for 2 years, but went 16-9 while he was there and was the ACC Coach of the Year 2 years ago. So, yeah, in his first year there, I think they got the right hire, but if he was going back to a school he had coached before, not in the SEC, I would like his chances to succeed better right off the bat. But it
Okay.
being, the conference that it is, it's going to take a little while. But they've always had talent. They just haven't had the person who can put the personalities and the talent together to get a good team or a great team on the field. So hopefully with him at the helm, he can finalize those two parts.
Duke opted to roll with Manny Diaz to replace him. So Manny Diaz, after spending a couple of years as the defensive coordinator at Penn State, getting another crack at a head coaching job, coming back to Duke. He's a defensive-minded guy, so it kind of vibes with what Mike Elko was doing there from a philosophical standpoint. But, man, Manny Diaz has kind of flamed out as a head coach before. What do you think of the Blue Devils' decision to give him another shot here?
I think this might be the school for him to
Okay.
really own his craft as a head coach. Because you're right, his time at NC State and Miami were not well, or in Florida State as well, were not well when it comes to head coaching. So I think him being at a school that has had success recently at the college football level, ranks or whatever, but the expectations aren't as high as the other school that he's coached at. I think this might be the best fit for him, especially being a defensive minded coach. The Blue Devils, are a tougher program to maintain than Miami, but he
Sure.
understands the challenges in the area extremely well. So I think this is a good hire. It's just I think it's the right fit for him more than it is for the school.
Kind of feels like maybe a stabilizing force for his career as
Yeah.
far as opportunities to get his feet beneath him as a head coach again. Let's talk about the Washington Huskies, a program we've mentioned. We talked about Jed Fish a little earlier in the show. He takes over for Kalen DeBoer after DeBoer goes to Alabama. Jed Fish, not successful early on in his run at Arizona, but he really turned that program around and had them competitive last year. But This feels like a tall task to take over a roster that was depleted by the NFL draft. They are going to be moving to the Big Ten, which I think will be more competitive than the Pac-12 would have been. Do you think the stage is too big for a guy like Jed Fish right now, or are you in love with this hire?
I'm not in love with it, but I do like it. I think this kind of like Manny Diaz, it could be very and Texas A&M's hire. It could be very beneficial for that program and that school if they're willing to invest the time in the coach.
Yeah,
Uh, like he was horrendous his first year at
1 and
Arizona,
11.
going 1-11, but then
Yeah,
turned it around to 10-3. 2 years later, I believe,
yeah,
and then now he finds himself the head coach of the national runner-up, the Washington Huskies. So I think he could be a good fit there. Will he get him back to that level of success? I really don't think that could happen. But to contend year in and year out with a high bowl game and such, I think if given the time, he could have that kind of success at Washington.
I'm kind of with you. I kind of feel like there's going to be a little bit of a transitional period with the Huskies, but I think long term, this is an innovative offensive mind in a sport where you want to have innovative offensive mind. So I think he's a hot commodity, and I think once they kind of replenish the roster a little bit, I think this is still going to be a program to be a factor in the Big 18. Talking about the West Coast, I think Jonathan Smith did one of the more commendable jobs with the Oregon State Beavers the last couple of years. I mean, that team, that roster, the way it was constructed, really had no business competing for a conference title, yet they were scrappy. They were in almost every game. It was his alma mater, and he is leaving the head job as the head coach of his alma mater to go take the job at Michigan State. What do you think what do you think this was about, McCash? I mean, do you think Oregon State had kind of hit its ceiling under Jonathan Smith? Do you think it was simple money, or do you think he might have seen some of the dominoes falling with this conference realignment stuff and said, "Hey, I got to get the hell out of Dodge and find somewhere where I can still compete for a national championship"? I don't know.
I'm guessing it's the stability thing of the conference for me, and maybe money as well, because obviously there's probably more money offered, obviously. But Michigan State has been so down these last 4 or 5
Sure.
years. I think they've been down. I
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to take that level of a challenge on at this point in my career if I'm him, when you've done so well at Oregon State, and granted, you and Washington State have been left on an island by yourself in the Pac-2.
Yeah.
But I think given a year or two, that's going to write itself out somehow, whether you go to the Mountain West or other teams leave other conferences and you form a new conference with them. Who knows? I mean, good for him wanting to take on that challenge, but I think I would have stuck where it was safe at that point. But that's also why I'm not a head coach, because as a head coach, you can't do it safe.
It just feels like a lateral move to me, and it's a lateral move into a conference that plays his style of football pretty regularly. So you think there's going to be an uptick in competition. It's not going to be as easy to stand out. And like you said, if he did accept the job for some noble sense of competition, then I think it's commendable. Good for him for
Yeah.
doing it. But I kind of felt like this was the timing of it to me it's a little wonky. And if you want to look at this, I'm not saying this is the case. We're just recklessly speculating here. But if you're Jonathan Smith and you're looking at the situation, like, I don't know if we're going to be in a conference in a couple of years' time. I need to jump ship while I'm still a hot commodity. I'm just going to take whatever major conference job I can get. Michigan State calls, you answer the phone. I mean, that's kind of the only rationale I can make for it, because
Yeah.
this seems like a lateral movement to me. Do you think it's fair to say that this is a lateral movement from program to program?
I have the same thoughts as you, but I will give him credit. He's bringing his quarterback with him.
Well,
Uh,
touche.
Yeah, I mean, he's got Aiden Childs, who has had a great career so far at Oregon State. So at least he's taken something familiar from the Beavers with him. So I
What do
mean, to
you
me, no, go ahead. I was going to say it is a lateral move to me.
What do you make of Boston College hiring Bill O'Brien? Because me personally, we've covered Bill O'Brien a lot between his run in the NFL with the Houston Texans and his run with Penn State as offensive coordinator at Alabama. I mean, Bill O'Brien has been a big figure in the football world, pro and college, for the last decade plus, and now he lands at Boston College, a program that has been pretty down bad in recent years in its own right. I mean, is Bill O'Brien still instilling confidence in fan bases? Like, is he still good and relevant enough to turn around a program like this?
I think with this, it kind of reminds me of the University of Memphis's football program, not to go back to your potential
Everything comes back to Memphis.
yeah. But they hired Tommy West in the early 2000s to help build the football program at Memphis, and he had great success. I mean, he had D'Angelo Williams who helped guide them to their first bowl game in my lifetime in 2004, I believe it was, at the New Orleans Bowl against North Texas. But Boston College wasn't looking to make a coaching move. They just lost their defensive. I mean, they lost their head coach to the Green Bay Packers to be a defensive
Yeah,
coordinator,
yeah.
and they were late in the game being able to find a new coach, and they kind of just luckily landed on Bill O'Brien. But the good thing for him is he has a lot of ties to that area from his times with the with the New England Patriots
Mhm,
and such. You know, when he was at Penn State as well, so
mhm.
he's got ties there to both the NFL and the college game as well in that area, and I think that's going to be beneficial for him to get some of those players to stay local or to get them from some of the surrounding areas as well. And his name alone, I think, will help drive interest from the fan base and such that may be able to build up some of those NIL programs to bring in some better players. Am I thinking they're going to attend for the ACC championship in the next couple of years? No, but if they're like an 8-9 win team consistently, I think it's been a great hire.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I know one thing, the offense damn well should be a lot more fun to watch than it was
Oh,
last year.
absolutely.
Um, John Summerall taking the role at Tulane, a program that if you've been with us on the College Football Roundup for very long, you know we got a soft spot in our hearts for the Tulane program. We were a little early on the Tulane Green Wave arrival, but nonetheless, they lose Willie Fritz to Houston. Willie Fritz done a fantastic job with Tulane, one of the best coaching
Yep.
jobs we've seen in the last several seasons. But man, I'm telling you, I listened to my buddy Braden Gall on 440 Sports talk about John Summerall when he was the head coach at Troy. He interviewed him for the Fringe Element one summer. I can't remember if it was last summer or the summer before. And he said to us, he said, guys, this guy is going to be a head coach in the SEC one day. Did a fantastic job at Troy. Now he takes the step up to Tulane. He is inheriting a program that is humming on all cylinders right now. I think this is an up and comer that Tulane's got, where they've kind of lucked into their last two head football coaches between Willie Fritz and John Summerall. What do you make of what's going on at Tulane right now?
I don't disagree that he's one of the hot commodities in college football coaching. But I don't want to call Troy and Tulane a lateral move, but it's not the big jump I think a lot of people think it is, because Troy is a damn outstanding program right
Yeah.
now with the
Hmm.
success that he's built there. I think he could have gotten a better job if he would have held out one more year instead of going to Tulane. But you got to strike when the iron's hot, and so I don't blame him. I just hate that he's going to have to play Memphis this year. And granted, we're going to New Orleans, so
Hey,
I might have to drive down I-55 and go watch my Tigers. Give him a big L at the end of the season. But I think in all honesty, I think he's going to have a tremendous success at Tulane and help continue to build that program. Because if Tulane is good, the rest of the conference is good, and that at the end of the day is what we as AAC fans really want, is not it to be a 1-2 team at the top. Let's have as many teams eating the cake as possible.
conversely, what do you make of Willie Fritz going to Houston? The odds that he can kind of correct things and right the ship for the Cougs.
I like his chances, to be honest. I was a big fan of his. Um, I still wish Houston was in the conference with us, but I think he is going to turn that team around and have them playing consistently in the next couple of years, challenging for the Big 12 championship. I love the way he coaches. I love the style of play he has. So I think this is going to be an exciting future for Houston.
So I've got one more to ask you about, and of course,
Derek
we've talked
Mason.
we've talked about your Memphis Tigers plenty. Can we talk about my Blue Raiders for just one
Absolutely.
moment? Talk about the hiring of much maligned former Vanderbilt head coach Derek Mason, who's recently spent some time with Oklahoma State and Auburn as defensive coordinator. Um, didn't really have a lot of success as a head coach at Vanderbilt, but has a reputation on the defensive side of the ball. I Listen, I am shocked for one that MTSU actually fired Rick Stockstill, because that man, if it gives you any indication as to how long he was coach in Murfreesboro, he got the job when I was still in college. Okay. You're talking about the mid 2000s. So a long run with the Blue Raiders. And obviously, he is a beloved figure in Murfreesboro. The 20 Blue Raiders fans that are here in Middle Tennessee, who just, that man's never going to have to pay for a drink in town ever again. No problem with that. Derek Mason coming in is kind of a big name around here. And I don't know if it's because he was just the head coach at Vanderbilt or if people recognize his defensive prowess, but he strikes me as a sort of stabilizing hire for this program. It's a big name that has experience at the highest levels of college football, for better or for worse, and knows what it takes to win at that level. Do you give him any shot in Conference USA this year?
This year, maybe not. But let's take this into mind. I think he's going to have really good success at MTSU. And I say it for this reason. He went 27-55 at Vanderbilt. That's not great at all. But he did go to 2 bowl games, which
Mhm.
is really big for Vanderbilt. And he beat Tennessee not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of programs that during that stretch that say they can beat Tennessee 3 times.
Fair enough.
With that said, MTSU does not have the academic standards that Vanderbilt has. So
No,
it's
they
going to
do
be
not.
easier for, and that's not a shot at MTSU. It's just telling you how strong academically a school Vanderbilt is. So he's not going to have his hands tied so much when it comes to recruiting. And I think he's going to be able to get the players he wants that'll buy into his system and help him build that program back up to where Rick Stockstill had it running when he went to 7 bowl games in an 11-year span. I like this hire. I kind of account it to the Manny Diaz hire at Duke, where
Mm.
it's a better fit for the coach than it is the school, maybe.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Any other coaching carousel figures that you want to talk about before we move on? Because that's all I had written down.
I'm excited to see what Major Applewhite is going to do at where did he end up at South Alabama.
Yeah.
It's a good start for him, and it's funny. I feel like I'm really noticing how old I'm getting. Where the players I used to watch in college football like 15, 20 years ago are now getting head coaching jobs, and it makes me feel old, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
He
I'm
was a
with
name
you.
that kind of stuck out at me. Was really the only one that I'm interested in following along with. But Deshaun Foster at UCLA, I thought was interesting, and I'll tell you why I thought it was interesting, because I must have been in a coma when Chip Kelly left, because I don't remember Chip Kelly leaving to go to Ohio State.
Yeah. Well, here we
So when
are.
I saw when I saw Deshaun Foster's name, who's a legend at UCLA, he once held some of the
Yes.
single game rushing records there. Um, so that's going to be interesting to see how he does, not only with the biggest job he's had in coaching, but also moving to a brand new conference. So that's going to be an interesting to keep an eye on.
Let's talk about these expanded playoffs. 12 teams. You're going to get the 5 highest ranked conference champions and then the 7th highest ranked teams afterwards. 4 highest ranked conference champs will be ranked 1 through 4 and will get a bye to the quarterfinals. And then you get, the 5 versus the 12, the 6 versus the 11, so on and so forth. The games are going to take place with the first round of the playoffs going down on December 20th and 21st. Then there's going to be a bit of a break. The New Year's 6 will serve as the quarterfinals. The semis will take place on the 9th and 10th of January, which is normally about the window that we see the national championship in. And then on January 20th, you do get the national championship. I'm stoked, and yeah, happy birthday to McCash as well. I am stoked that the season is going to be prolonged and we are going to get more meaningful games in December. I'm as big a sicko as anybody, and I love watching meaningless bowl games. I always try to find the draft prospects so I can get an evaluation in as I'm watching them. But some of the games that we see in mid-December are just completely meaningless. The stakes are going to be high for this one. I'm I'm excited about it in that regard. How are you feeling about the 12-team playoff,
I'm
McCash?
so excited. I thought 8 was gonna be the perfect number, but
Me
I
too.
now that it's in front of me and I can see it, I can almost touch it, I think 12 is the perfect number. I don't think they should go any higher. I mean, like, football is a strenuous sport. I'd be like, and these are young 18 to 22-year-old kids. Let's don't add more pressure because not most of them, but there's a small group of them when you look at the vast amount that play that have the aspiration and the ability to get to the next level and play in the NFL. Let's don't, go to 16 and 20 teams, and then risk some of these kids, not be able to play in the NFL because they get hurt or they do make it and then there's their careers cut short because of injuries that have built up over the greed of the NCAA. That's a whole other topic as well. But in all seriousness, I'm really excited. I kind of wish we could just skip to like the second week of December when we find out who the teams are and where they're playing and such. Because I want to know where Memphis is going. Because I know we'll be the 12 seed. We're not going to get any higher than that. Let's be honest. I'm already penciling us in, baby.
There we go. So let's look at the AP poll, the preseason AP poll that's out. The top 12 teams ranked right now are Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, Florida State, Missouri, and Utah. Now, the way that the college football playoff is organized, it helps the group of 5. It pretty much assures that a group of 5 teams going to get in there. But they don't have a group of 5 team in the top 25 at all right now. The highest in the others receiving votes category would be Boise State. And that
Yep.
kind of lines up with a lot of what the analysts think as far as who's going to win that group of 5 spot. Boise State seems to be a favorite. So in that case, the last 2 teams in the playoff field would actually be Utah bumping up to 11 and then Boise State taking that 12th spot. How does that sound as a playoff field? I mean, do you think that's about right? Who are some of the dark horses you think could rise up and take some of these spots, and who do you think should be the favorite?
Well, I mean, the favorite obviously to me is always going to be Georgia until Georgia doesn't know how to Georgia anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
a lot of players in trouble for
that's
Georgia.
true. That is true. But just looking at the top 25 overall, I don't know if I have like a dark horse looking at this. I mean, Oklahoma, I guess, sitting at 16.
Yeah,
I think Oklahoma could be that one that's gonna because I think Missouri's gonna have a letdown from last year.
you think so?
I
Okay.
do, I do. Florida State lost a lot
Yeah.
to the
Mhm.
draft, so they could have a bumpy ride, especially when they get into conference play.
I kind of feel like Clemson could be good this year.
I'm not look. I have I have I have screened praises of Clemson too much on this damn podcast and gotten bitten in the ass. So I'm not. I see them and that other orange team are right next to each other. So I'm not even going to pretend I see those two teams.
All
And I
right.
also think Michigan is going to kind of step down. With
Yeah.
everything they lost, plus having a new head coach. So
Yeah.
Oklahoma, LSU, I think could jump up in there too, but they have a new head coach too. So we'll see. No, they don't. No, they don't. Never mind. Uh, I think those are my 2, LSU and Oklahoma to sneak up in there.
I'm gonna add my Big 12 champion Kansas Jayhawks to the mix. Let's go, baby.
Okay.
Dark horse playoff run. We'll make our official playoff predictions once we get closer
Yeah.
to week 0. And I don't know if that's next week or actually I think it is next week that we got to do all that because I think the games start on the 25th, if I'm not mistaken.
I know Memphis' first game is the 31st, so I think that's technically week 1 because it's Labor Day weekend. So I think you're right. The week before is week 0. But let me ask you this before we move on.
Okay.
You've got Memphis and Boise State. Let's say both teams I'm gonna pencil in Memphis loses to Florida State. And
Okay.
let's say we run the table with the rest of our games, win our conference championship. Boise State does the same thing in Southwest. They're one-loss team. Both of those will obviously be top 15 teams, I would think,
One
at
would
that
think,
point.
yeah. Mhm.
With Memphis not having any bad losses because losing to Florida State's nothing to sneeze at. I
Sure.
haven't looked at Boise's schedule, but I think they've got a couple of tough matchups on their schedule, if I remember correctly. I think against Oregon, maybe. Maybe I misspoken there.
I
But
can't
what are the
recall off the
chances
top of my head.
that in this first year that both of those teams could make the playoff?
Ooh.
With
Oh,
only with
man,
only
now we're
one
getting
loss with
spicy.
only one loss.
We're getting spicy.
I
I
know. I'm
think
dreaming
so.
big.
I think you're right about Florida State and Michigan potentially having fallback years. I think I might put I think I might put Penn State in that category as well. I know they got the
Really.
quarterback and people think he's going to be a factor in the NFL, but he's got a long way to go if you ask me. And I kind of go back to your argument about the SEC from earlier, like how many teams can really take up the field. So, you know what? Let's start it. Let's start the unhinged takes right here, episode
Well,
1 of the 2024 season. Boise State and Memphis
and then
both
Liberty
getting into
goes
the playoffs.
and then Liberty goes undefeated. What do you
Okay,
do with them?
that's where I draw the line. I'm drawing the line at Liberty. Well, that's all I got, man. I think next week we'll kind of get into conference previews a little more, predict each conference winner, talk about the Heisman a little bit, and make our final. Golly, this was a lot easier when we only had to predict 4 teams getting into the
Yeah.
playoffs, but we're gonna try and do 12 next week.
Let's do it. I'm
McCash,
not scared.
thank you for joining me. I'm happy to kick this project off for another season. You got any parting shots before we get on out of here today? There's no games to bet on this week, so
No games to bet on unless you're a degenerate and you're gonna go look for baseball or lacrosse somewhere or something. I don't know.
yeah,
New episodes of we call it season 2 of Eye on the Tigers podcast, all about the University of Memphis Tigers. We're going to mainly focus on football over the next couple of months, but we'll throw in basketball and some of the other fall sports that are getting ready to kick off. But other than that, man, I'm so excited for football. And next week, I will have updates on how Memphis did in my dynasty on College Football 25. Hopefully, I'll have my national championship to show off, but we'll see.
there we go. Go eat at Memo's Mexican Kitchen out in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Check out all of our work at SobrosNetwork.com. Merch is up at SobrosShop.com. You can join the Sobros Substack through Stacking the Inbox at StackingTheInbox.com. Rate, review, subscribe to the College Football Roundup. Jump in the comments with us. We're going to be trying to go live at 4 o'clock every Thursday this season, as often as we can anyway, as the football season is underway. So that's going to do it for this week's show. We will catch you again next week. He is the Sobros Network's utility man.